It's strange how fast the world moves when you have nowhere to go. I remember the sound of my shoes scuffing against the pavement. The way the city lights flickered above like they didn't care. I was 19, cold, and carrying everything. I owned in a backpack that smelled like motel carpet. I hadn't spoken a word aloud in hours, maybe days. My voice felt like something that belonged to a past life, the one before my family told me I wasn't welcome anymore. That night I didn't cry. I just sat on a splintered wooden bench outside a closed bookstore that smelled like old paper and stale coffee grounds. And that's where he found me. His name was Cameron. Well, at the time, I only knew him as the man who always brought his coffee in a porcelain cup, instead of the paper ones the rest of us used when the shelter served breakfast. There was something oddly gentle about him, like he was made of silence instead of flesh and bone. He always tipped the volunteers, always left with a folded newspaper tucked under one arm. He never looked lost, and I hated how much I noticed. That particular night, he sat beside me without asking. We both stared ahead at nothing for what felt like an hour. Then he said, "I hate Thursdays, they always feel unfinished." I turned to him, confused. "It's Monday." He smiled like I'd just caught him in a secret. I guess it's been a long week. I should have told him to go away, that I wasn't in the mood, that I didn't need a pity conversation from a stranger who probably had a Tesla and a penthouse and a dog named Winston, but instead I asked, "Why'd you sit here?" "I recognized you. From the soup kitchen, you sit alone." I shrugged. I guess that's a habit. There was silence between us again, but this one didn't feel empty. It felt like something breathing. We didn't exchange names. He didn't ask why I was sleeping outside with a hoodie pulled over my head and my backpack hugged against my chest like it could protect me from everything I'd lost. And I didn't ask why a man in dress shoes and an expensive coat was spending his Monday night on a bench beside someone who hadn't shaved in weeks. I just let him be there, and for the first time in a long time, someone letting me exist felt like enough. The next morning I woke up still sitting upright, my spine aching, my fingers curled tightly around the strap of my bag. But there was something different. A to-go cup sat next to me, not from the shelter, a real one. Vanilla-scented steam curling from the lid, and next to it, a folded napkin with 2 words written in careful handwriting: "You deserved warmth." That was the first time I felt seen in months. It wasn't until a week later, after another silent coffee, another shared bench, another wordless goodbye, that I learned his name was Cameron. He'd noticed I always looked at the bookstore window before I fell asleep. The same dusty window filled with first editions and forgotten stories. "Do you read?" he asked casually one day, handing me a paperback with a cracked spine. "This one's about a man who runs away from everything and ends up finding something better." I traced the cover with my thumb. "Sounds unrealistic," I said. Cameron didn't argue. He just leaned back and smiled at the sky. "You never know," he said. "Some stories don't start until you've lost the first chapter." I didn't know it then, but something had shifted between us. Not loudly, not with fireworks or heartbeats racing. Just the subtle ache of realizing you've been waiting for someone to see you not as a lost cause, not as a burden, but as something quietly worth returning to. And Cameron kept showing up, always with that calm look in his eyes. Always. With something soft to say, even if he never said the one thing I hoped he might. Not yet. Asterisk. It became routine. Every Tuesday and Friday evening, like clockwork, Cameron would appear either at the bench or outside the shelter, or once, memorably, leaning against the rusted railing of the overpass where I sometimes sat just to feel the breeze. He never said much about himself at first. I knew he worked in finance, whatever that meant. I knew he had a dog named Moses who hated elevators. And I knew that no matter how nice his coat was, he never seemed to treat me like I was beneath him. There was a gentleness in him that didn't feel forced. He'd bring 2 coffees black for him, sweet and creamy for me, and a different book each time. Some were old, some dog-eared, some wrapped in tissue like they meant something. He'd hand one to me and say, "This one reminds me of you," or "This one has a line I thought you'd underline." And I always did. One evening he asked, "Did you ever think about leaving the city?" I raised an eyebrow. With what? My good looks and library card? He smiled. I'd say the attitude alone could get you a ticket to Vermont. It was stupid banter, meaningless, but I found myself holding on to it hours later when I was curled under a thin blanket in the shelter bunk, replaying the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he always gave space before asking questions, like he respected silence more than most people respected answers. We had inside jokes by then. Like how he claimed Tuesdays were cursed and that people who eat plain oatmeal lack imagination. I'd argue back that black coffee made him look like a brooding detective from a bad TV drama. He'd grin and say, I'll take brooding over boring. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. He'd sit beside me with his coat draped over his lap and just exist. It was those moments that stuck with me the most. I'd watch his hands always fidgeting with something, a napkin corner, a loose thread, the edge of a book cover. It made him seem human, reachable, even though everything about him screamed out of reach. One night, while we were both sitting on the library steps watching people pass by, he said something I didn't expect. You remind me of my brother. Froze a little. Oh, I said quietly. Good or bad? He looked over at me, and for the first time his smile faltered. Good, he was honest, even when it scared people. I didn't press further. I just nodded and looked down at my lap, my fingers nervously tracing the rim of the coffee lid, but in that silence I felt something shift. Like we'd shared a piece of ourselves that couldn't be taken back. A week later, something changed. The shelter closed for 2 days for fumigation, and I had nowhere to sleep. The bench was cold, and the wind was worse than usual. My hoodie was still damp from an earlier drizzle, and even with my back curled tight, I couldn't stop shivering. That's when Cameron found me. Again, only this time instead of sitting. Down beside me with his usual soft voice, he crouched in front of me and said, Come with me. I blinked. What? I have a guest room. It's empty. It's clean. And I'm not letting you spend another night out here like this. I hesitated. My heart slammed against my chest. The part of me that had been hurt too many times screamed not to trust it. Not to trust him? Not to mistake kindness for something. It wasn't, but then he added, just for the night. No expectations, no strings, just come in from the cold. I didn't answer. I just stood up. His apartment was ridiculous. High ceilings, open windows, shelves filled with books and records and strange knickknacks like he'd been collecting them from lives he never lived. Everything smelled like cedarwood and something expensive I couldn't name. You can take the guest room, he said, not looking at me as he poured hot water into a mug. There's clean clothes in the drawer. I didn't know your size, so I guessed. I nodded, my throat dry. My fingers trembled as I took the tea from him, and for a second they brushed his. He didn't flinch. Neither did I, but that touch lingered far longer in my memory than it should have. Later that night, as I stood in the guest bathroom brushing my teeth with a brand-new toothbrush he'd somehow had waiting, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The hoodie I'd been living in was gone, replaced by a soft navy shirt that fit surprisingly well. My hair was damp from the shower. My face was flushed, and for the first time in weeks, I looked like someone worth something, as I settled under the soft covers of the guest bed. I heard him walk past my door. Then stop. There was a long pause. Then, quietly, if you need anything, just knock, okay? Okay, I whispered back. Not sure if he heard me. I didn't sleep right away. I lay there listening to the city outside the window, the faint hum of traffic and the quiet buzz of warmth in my chest that I didn't know what to do with. There was no denying it anymore. I wanted him to see me, really see me. And a part of me feared. He already did. It was supposed to be a simple errand. Cameron had asked if I wanted to go with him to pick up a bookshelf he'd found at some antique shop across town. He said it was too big for him to carry alone, and I joked that he just wanted free labor. In truth, I was glad he asked. It meant he wanted me around for more than just quiet conversations and half-read books. The drive there was smooth music low, windows cracked, one of his jazz playlists filling the space. He tapped the steering wheel to the rhythm, humming quietly, and I found myself stealing glances at him. The way the sun came through the windshield and caught in his dark hair. The way his fingers moved so precisely, calm, always so calm. I didn't realize antique stores were so far out, I said, stretching my legs when we pulled into the gravel driveway of the shop. Cameron looked over at me and smiled. I like the ones that take a little effort. They usually have more soul. Something about that stuck with me. The trouble started on the way back. We loaded the bookshelf into the back of his SUV. It barely fit, and we had to tilt it at an awkward angle. It wasn't fancy, but it was solid wood, old, and smelled faintly of cedar and age. Cameron was visibly pleased. Then the engine wouldn't start. He tried twice, then again. Nothing but a choking cough and a few blinking lights on the dash. Dead. Battery? I asked, sliding into the passenger seat. He sighed, rubbing a hand over his jaw. No, worse, electrical issue maybe. I haven't had it checked in weeks. We were over 40 minutes from the city. Trees surrounded us, and the only light came from the flickering sign above the now-closed antique store. No reception either, I said, holding up my phone. It's like we drove straight into the 1800s. He leaned back in his seat and exhaled. Looks like we're stuck for a while. There was a long pause, then a soft chuckle escaped his lips. What? I asked. Nothing, he said. Just of all the people to be stuck in the middle of nowhere with... I'm glad it's you. My heart stuttered and I looked away, pretending to check my phone again. Yeah, I muttered. Same. An hour passed. The temperature dipped. It wasn't freezing, but the chill made my hands tuck into my sleeves. Cameron turned on the car's auxiliary power to warm the cabin, then reclined his seat slightly. We should probably get comfortable, he said. It's going to be a while before anyone comes by. He offered me his coat. I didn't want to take it, but he draped it over me anyway, and then silence again. The kind that felt thick and full of something unnamed. Do you always do this? I asked, breaking the quiet. He turned his head toward me. Do what? Help people like me. He blinked slowly. I don't help people like you. My chest tightened. Oh, I help you, he clarified. There's a difference. I didn't know what to say to that. The air between us felt warmer, but heavier too. I turned to face him more fully, our knees brushing slightly in the tight space between our seats. He didn't move away. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. You're kind, Cameron, I said softly. Too kind. His lips twitched into a smile. You say that like it's a bad thing. Sometimes it is. Because people like me start hoping. I said it, not all of it, but enough to feel like my ribs were about to split open. He didn't speak right away. Then, gently, what is it you're hoping for? The question hung in the air like smoke. I could lie. I could brush it off, but I didn't. I don't know, I whispered. Something I'm scared to want. Something that's probably not real. He didn't look away. His gaze stayed fixed on me, so steady it almost hurt, and then he reached over, slowly, and adjusted the coat around my shoulders, his fingers brushing my collarbone. My breath hitched. It was nothing, barely a touch. But it sent a tremor through me, small and deep and undeniable. Time moved strangely after that. I couldn't stop glancing at him. At the way his arm rested just inches from mine. At the way his voice lowered when he asked me if I was warm enough. At the way his fingers lingered. Near the gear shift, relaxed but precise, he didn't do anything overt. He didn't cross any lines, but everything felt like a question, and I was full of answers I was afraid to say out loud. Eventually, he leaned his seat back further and closed his eyes. Rest, he said. We'll figure things out in the morning. I tried, but I couldn't. The space between us was too loud. My thoughts too crowded. I kept thinking about what he said. I help you. Not people like me, not out of obligation. But because it was me. I shifted slightly, turning toward him again. The dim glow from the dashboard cast soft shadows across his face. He looked younger somehow, less guarded. Like the silence allowed him to be someone the world rarely saw. I whispered, Cameron? His eyes opened instantly. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I can't sleep. He nodded. Then, hesitantly, he reached out just a little and his hand brushed mine. I know this is complicated. he murmured. But I want you to know I see you. My chest ached, not because it hurt, but because I wanted more than anything to believe him. I turned my hand, letting my fingers brush against his, a silent answer. A test. He didn't pull away. Instead, he laced his fingers with mine. No kiss. No dramatic moment, just that, his hand in mine, warm, real, and everything I hadn't said, finally beginning to bloom in the quiet between us. The morning sunlight crept in through the windshield, like it didn't care what had shifted between us in the night. Cameron's hand was still holding mine loosely now, almost as if unsure whether it had ever been intentional. I stayed still, for a long time, afraid that if I moved, the moment would vanish, like waking up from one of those dreams that felt too good to be real, but it had been real. I glanced sideways. His eyes were closed, his chest rising slowly under his coat. There was something peaceful about him like this, not polished or measured, just human, and I wanted God. I wanted so much more than just a shared silence in a broken-down SUV. I quietly slipped my hand away and turned toward the window, trying to calm the swirl in my chest, the kind that made my heart race and my stomach tighten. It wasn't just nerves anymore, it was hope. And that terrified me more than anything. When Cameron stirred an hour later, the air between us felt different, charged but cautious. We didn't talk about the night, not directly. He just stretched, yawned, and muttered something about calling a tow service, but as we waited for the mechanic to show, I caught him watching me more than once, and not in a way that felt platonic. It was in the way his eyes softened when I pushed my hair out of my face, the way his lips parted slightly when I laughed at something dumb on my phone, the way he shifted closer during a lull in conversation, like he didn't want even the air between us. Eventually, we were back on the road, riding in silence as the engine hummed beneath us. He offered to drop me off at the shelter. I said I'd rather go back to his place, and he nodded without hesitation. That evening we sat across from each other on his living room floor, a half-eaten pizza box between us and 2 untouched beers sweating in our hands. I'd been quiet most of the night, and he noticed. "You okay?" he asked, leaning forward slightly. "Yeah," I lied. He didn't press. He never did. But I saw the flicker of worry in his eyes. "I've just been thinking," I said eventually, my voice too soft. "About?" I hesitated. "About how strange it is. I'm here, with you, in this apartment, drinking a beer I didn't pay for, wearing socks you lent me." He smiled gently. "It's not strange to me." I looked down at the label on the bottle, peeling it slowly with my thumb. "It is to me. Why? Because—" I exhaled. "Because 6 months ago, I didn't know if I'd make it to the end of the week. And now I'm sitting across from someone who makes me feel—" I cut myself off, his brows furrowed. "Makes you feel what?" I shook my head. "Forget it." "No," he said softly. "Don't do that. Don't pull away now." I swallowed hard. "You don't understand, Cameron. I was tossed out like trash for who I am, for being gay. I was told, no, Sean, that I wasn't worthy of love or safety, or a future." My voice cracked. I hated how raw I sounded. "And now," I continued, my eyes stinging, "you're here, you're kind. You see me. And I keep asking myself if I'm reading too much into it, if I'm just desperate for something good." He didn't speak right away. The silence felt crushing, and then he reached across the space between us and gently took the bottle from my hand, setting it aside. His fingers hovered near mine, just hovering, before he finally spoke. "You're not reading too much into it," he said. I looked up. He was looking at me like I was something fragile and precious all at once. "I see you. And I feel this too," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I've been trying to ignore it, trying to be careful, but I haven't stopped thinking about you since the first night we sat on that bench." My breath caught in my throat. "I told myself it was just empathy," he continued. "That I just wanted to help, but it's more than that. I look forward to your laugh, your quiet, even your sarcasm." He smiled faintly. "You make the world feel less distant." Tears welled up in my eyes before I could stop them. I wiped at my face with the sleeve of his hoodie, the one I'd borrowed that morning. "I've been so scared," I whispered, scared that if I let myself want you, it would ruin everything, that I'd lose the only good thing that's happened to me in years. Cameron's face broke open with something tender and pained. I don't want to be another person who hurts you, he said. But I also don't want to lie and pretend like I haven't wanted to tell you this for weeks. I nodded, too full of emotion to speak. He leaned in slowly, not like a movie kiss. Not dramatic or sudden, but careful, and when his lips met mine, it was soft, just a brush. Just a question waiting for an answer. I kissed him back. My hand found his jaw, and his fingers curled around my wrist, grounding me. The world around us melted, the couch, the dim light. The city outside, all of it faded. It wasn't passionate. Not yet, it was reverent. Like we were finally holding the truth between us after carrying it for so long. When we finally pulled back, foreheads resting together, he whispered, "You're not alone anymore." I let the words sink into me like warmth, like safety. And in that moment, I believed him. We didn't move for a while, just sat there on the living room floor, knees touching, heads bowed, our breaths mingling in the quiet. The kiss had been brief, almost shy, but it said everything neither of us had dared to say before. I felt like I'd stepped into a room I'd only ever seen through a locked window, and now that I was inside, I didn't want to leave. Cameron gave a soft laugh, almost under his breath. "What?" I asked, looking up at him. He shook his head. "I just never imagined this happening here, on the floor. Next to a half-eaten pizza and 2 warm beers," I snorted. "Romantic, right?" He smiled, unexpectedly so. There was something lighter in his voice now, a loosening. Like the weight of silence had finally been lifted from both our shoulders. I leaned my shoulder against his, testing the contact like it might vanish if I pressed too hard. He didn't flinch. In fact, he leaned back just enough to let our arms settle against each other comfortably. "I'm not used to this," I said after a moment. "Me neither. I don't really know what I'm doing." He nodded gently, brushing his thumb along my wrist. "That makes 2 of us." Later, after we cleaned up dinner and migrated to the couch, I curled my legs beneath me while Cameron pulled a blanket over us. His living room felt warmer now, not just because of the heat, but because of everything that had shifted between us. We didn't sit at opposite ends anymore. We didn't watch each other from a distance. He sat close, his thigh against mine, his arm resting lightly along the back of the couch, fingers occasionally brushing my shoulder. We talked about small things at first. How the bookshelf still smelled like dust and pine. How he once tried to build furniture himself and nearly glued his hand to a chair leg. I teased him about that and he rolled his eyes. "You laugh, but I still have the scar," he said, lifting his sleeve to show me. I leaned in, inspecting it, and then, without really thinking, I kissed the spot just above it. His breath caught. For a second, then his fingers brushed down the back of my neck, warm and slow. Neither of us said anything, but the silence this time was heavy with something good. Eventually, the conversation grew deeper. "What happens now?" I asked. He turned toward me, more serious now. "We take it slow, we figure it out together." I hesitated. "People might talk, about us, about you. You have a whole life, a career, a reputation. I'm just a kid who was sleeping on benches 2 months ago." He shifted closer. "Don't do that. Don't make yourself small. You've survived more than most people ever will. That doesn't make you less. It makes you more." I swallowed hard, emotion rising in my throat. "I still don't have it all figured out," I admitted, "where I'll be in 6 months. If I'll be strong enough to deal with everything that comes with this." "I don't expect you to have it figured out," he said gently. "I just want to be the one beside you while you do." That broke something open in me. A part of me had always believed that love, if I ever found it, would come with terms, conditions, a list of ways I had to prove I deserved it, but here he was, offering it with nothing but honesty and presence. As the night wore on, I leaned against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his breathing. His fingers drew lazy, patterns across my arm, absent, soothing, intimate. It felt like something sacred, something real. He spoke softly into my hair. "You make me feel like myself." That surprised me. "You? You seem like you always know who you are." I try to look like I do, he admitted, but you do make me slow down. Make me see things differently. I like who I am around you. I turned to look at him. I like who I am with you too. I whispered. We stayed like that for a long time, wrapped up in something we hadn't dared name for weeks. It didn't feel rushed. It didn't feel uncertain. It felt earned. And for the first time in a very long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving. I felt like I was beginning. Asterisk, asterisk. A week later, I stood beside Cameron in the quiet of his living room, holding a steaming mug of coffee while he knelt by the old bookshelf we'd hauled back together. He was organizing the bottom row fiction on the left, nonfiction on the right, though he kept getting distracted by the dust jackets, flipping them open like long-lost friends. I'm just saying, I teased, no one actually needs 5 different versions of The Great Gatsby. He looked up with that half-smile that always made my chest feel too tight. Each edition has its own mood, he replied. Like you, mysterious, surprisingly sharp, bad with mornings. Hey, I laughed. I'm getting better. He stood and walked over to me, brushing his thumb over the edge of my cup before stealing a sip. You still scowl at the sunrise, I bumped his shoulder gently. It scowls at me first. The warmth in his gaze settled something in me, something that had been trembling just beneath the surface all my life. I wasn't used to this kind of safety. The kind you didn't have to ask for. The kind that didn't come with conditions. That afternoon, we walked together to the used bookstore near the corner. I hadn't been back since the first night I'd slept on the bench outside its window. It felt surreal, almost sacred, to return not as someone lost and invisible, but as someone chosen. He reached for my hand as we stepped inside. Not dramatically, not for show, just his fingers folding over mine like they belonged there, and maybe they did. I thumbed the worn spines absently as we moved through the aisles. But my mind wasn't on books. It was on the way Cameron hummed softly beside me, on the way our elbows brushed as we turned the same corners, on the way he didn't let go of my hand even when he needed the other to grab something from a shelf. There was a moment when we both reached for the same poetry collection. Our hands touched. I looked at him and he was already looking at me. No words. Just a quiet knowing. Back at his apartment, I noticed something new above the bookshelf. A photo in a simple wooden frame. It was us from 2 nights ago, sitting on the rooftop, backs to the camera, city lights spread out before us like a painting. I turned to him slowly. You printed this? He nodded, almost sheepish. I wanted to remember. I stared at the image, my throat tightening. I never thought I'd be part of something worth remembering. His arm came around me gently, pulling me to his chest. You are, he murmured. You always were. Later that night, as we sat on the couch under the same shared blanket, Cameron reached into his hoodie pocket and pulled something out. It was a folded napkin. My breath caught. He handed it to me. Quiet, unfolding it, I saw. The words written in his familiar handwriting, you deserved warmth. The same words he'd left for me on that cold bench all those weeks ago. But this time, there was something added beneath them. And now you have mine. I didn't cry. Not exactly, but I leaned into him harder than I ever had, and he wrapped both arms around me like he understood everything I wasn't saying. I don't know what the future looks like, I whispered into his shirt. Me neither, he said. But I want to face it with you. I pulled back just enough to look at him. Even when I mess up? Even when I doubt everything? He smiled, brushing my hair from my face, especially then. That night, before we turned out the lights, Cameron reached over and laced our fingers together on top of the blanket. A small, silent gesture, but it meant the world. I used to think love would look like fireworks, like grand confessions and dramatic music and perfect timing, but here it was instead, quiet, steady, and real. In a borrowed hoodie, in a shared cup of coffee. In an old photo above a bookshelf. I didn't know exactly where we were headed, but for the first time in a long, long time, I knew I wasn't walking alone.